talking about the Tim Holtz distress crayons and different ways that you can use them, especially in your journal. Hi everybody, thank you for joining me today. Today I am excited to share a review and a how-to of the Tim Holtz distress crayons. I have struggled with these guys for a couple of years now. I've had them for a while and I never really appreciated them or understood entirely how to use them. I know that for mixed media, there's a lot of ways you can use them, especially with background building and texturing, but I've wanted to use them in my bullet journal. And that gets a little bit hairy because of how, I'm gonna say the bad word, moist they are. They're a wet medium and that can lend to being very messy in your bullet journal. So I've taken the time and I've sat down and I have figured out how we're going to use this in our notebooks. So I'm going to show you two ways that you can use these distress crayons in your notebooks. So firstly, let's talk about what they are. So these distress crayons are by Ranger and Tim Holtz, and they fit the distress line of inks and paints and everything that Tim Holtz has put out, which is what drew me to these distress crayons in the first place, was the fact that I love the color. I love the color range and I love working with the distress inks and the distress oxides. So these crayons are a soft, creamy watercolor formula, and they are shaped into the, they have a thick tip there. I've used this one quite a bit, so it's kind of flat. And they are made to work with water. So as I mentioned before, it's very easy to activate them and reactivate them. And honestly, it can be really frustrating to use them because they don't quite blend out as well when you use them directly on the page, at least not the way I was doing it. And so overall, I was just getting really frustrated. But in the meantime, I actually watched a ton of videos, especially by Tim Holtz himself, because he designed them. So I wanted to kind of get a better idea of how to use them and what they're used for. So firstly, these guys are super vibrant, super pigmented, especially when you're using them directly on the page. If you're using them directly on the page, you're probably going to want to use a fixative spray just to keep it in place so that you're not creating a huge mess in your notebook. They have the same color line as the distress line, which is a lot. I'm going to hold them up for you here. And they come in sets. Now, I believe they've been discontinued. So this video is more for people that have them and are looking for new ways to use them, or, you know, they're very similar to the Faber-Castell gelatos. So if you bought these instead of the gelatos, if you bought these and the gelatos, I'm hoping to give you new ideas on how to use these. If you're using these directly on the page, they can be used on dark and light color surfaces because they are vibrant. They say there's a short smudge video before drying, but I find I don't leave enough time for it to dry and I end up just making a big mess, which can be really frustrating, especially when bits fleck off, so that the flecks are there and then the flecks get all messed up into everything, and that's super frustrating. But they do work very well with the other distress products. I have done some experimenting and I will show you a project where I've used both together. But otherwise, let's get into how I'm using them in my bullet journal. Now, again, I was watching a Tim Holtz video and he's the one that came up with this idea. I'll link the video down below for you. It's a little bit lengthy and it talks about other products too. But he showed these paint palette cases. And he uses these for distress inks, so the alcohol inks, and mentioned that he does use some for his distress crayons. So I was like, okay, well, that's really cool. I'm going to do the same. And I went so far as to label all of it out. And using these as watercolor has been so amazing because it just dries and then you reactivate it with water and you're good to go. And then when you have used the ink up, you just add more and keep going. And this is actually a super fun way to use it, and so great to use it in your bullet journal, especially if you have the 160 GSM bullet journal. So I'm going to show you, we can do it directly in our notebooks, or you can do it on watercolor paper and add it into your journal afterwards. So super fun way to use it. Different colors as well. I don't find they blend as nicely. Will I haven't spent too much time blending colors together just because a notebook can only hold so much water. But I will be doing a project with them separate outside of a notebook so that you can get a full feel for them. What makes the Distress watercolor paint interesting is that it does have a distressed effect. So it dries very textured, like it looks crackly, and it's just interesting. You're not going to get that smoothness of a regular watercolor. This is going to be a little bit more rough looking, which depending on the project you're using or project you're working on could add a lot to it and be a lot of fun to use. So there you go. That's the general overview. I guess if we're talking price, if you are going to purchase these, they're about $13.99 for a pack of 6. Scrapbook.com and Ranger Ink, they do go on sale. So I think you can only buy them in the packs now. You can no longer buy them individually, which is frustrating because I am missing one color. And I'm a completist, so that's really keeps me up at night, but that's my problem, not yours. And so let's get started on our project. So I already lettered out what I was going to do for my layout. As you can see here, live your zest life. I used a compass to draw the lines for the lettering, and then just simple bubble lettering, and drew a lemon in the center. So very simple, very easy. If you want a tutorial on this style of lettering or drawing this lemon, let me know. Make sure you're drawing the lines very light so that you don't have to do too much erasing to get rid of the lines, and it's not going to show through your paint. I get really frustrated when it starts showing through my paint, but that's what we are going to be coloring in for this video. So I'm just grabbing my eraser and then we will get to work. For that, I am using this moldable eraser. We're just gonna soften it up a little bit so that it's easier to mold. We're just going to gently erase over it, just enough so that we can still see our lines, but we're not going to, it's not necessarily going to show through the paint. You could also use an ordinary eraser to do this. Whatever you have, just use it. Again, this is a distress ink or crayon video, so I'm going to be using the distress crayons. I'm probably going to be using mustard seed and probably the twisted citron because it is a lot of fun. And then maybe some worn lipstick for the lettering. So I'm actually just going to grab those because they are running low. So here I have my mustard seed. So I'm just going to go in here and add a bit more pigment in there, just like that. You don't have to use one of these. You can use any paint palette that you have. You just color in the center there and get the ink or the crayon in there, and then we're going to wet it and it's going to activate and we're going to be able to paint. Obviously, if you're watercoloring, it's watering down the pigment, and so I like to have these nearby so that I can add more pigment as I go. Okay, so we're going to start off with the lemon. I am using the mustard seed. So we're just going to activate that paint, and then we can just start adding the color. As you can see, I got a little bit of pigment, thick piece of pigment, but you know what? When, again, like as I said in the intro, when you're using this paint, expect texture And so that's just going to add to the texture. You're not going to get that smooth, delicate watercolor painting using this technique, using these colors. And I'm using a dark red notebook. If you're using the watercolor paper, you can definitely use more water to even that color out a bit more. I'm kind of limited in how much water I can put on the page. So okay, so as that starts to dry, you're gonna see that start to crack. And then I want to get a brown. I haven't labeled this one yet, but I'm just gonna grab a little bit of brown in here. Okay, and then we're going to be using Worn lipstick, which is this top pink color here. Let me show you this top pink color, and then we're going to start coloring in our lettering. Now, I'm not going to be showing blending in this video. We're just going to keep it pretty straightforward for now. Or sorry, I'm not going to show blending in this layout. Just going to be keeping it very simple. So that middle part is dry, so we're going to go in and outline some of the elements to help it stand out a little bit. And I'm not aiming for it to be exactly on par or perfect, just to help emphasize that distressed look. And that is how you can use the distress crayons in your journal, just like watercolor paint from a palette. The other option that you can have is to cut it out on watercolor paper, and then you can glue it in your notebook, and that's what I'm going to be creating for you next. So I have just grabbed some Artist Loft water paper. We're not getting too fancy. And what we're going to do for this project is we're going to paint a flower, and we're going to glue it together in our notebook. So this is going to give us a lot more flexibility when it comes to blending, and I want to show you how these guys blend together. So looking at the Distress Ink chart, I think I'm going to use the Candied Apple and the Abandoned Coral, which is this one and this one. And then for the leaves, we're going to use Twisted Citron and Mowed Lawn. So I'm just going to grab those so that we can fill those up. So we're going to grab some of the Abandoned Coral, and we're just going to paint out a leaf shape, or a petal shape, sorry. We're just doing a very basic floral, because this is more about testing the ink. If you're following along for the tutorial versus the testing of the distress crayons, you can definitely do this with any watercolor paint that you have. I'm just going to add more water in there and go in and grab Candied Apple. So what I'm doing now is I'm adding the darker color toward the middle, where I know I'm going to be gluing the flowers together. And this is on watercolor paper, so I'm adding as much water as I need. And now we're going to do that again. So we're going to do that 5 times for the 5 petals. Yeah, the second you add water to these, they become super creamy. So since we're cutting these out when we're done, I'm just drawing them all over the page so that you can see how they blend and how we can join them together when we glue them. Okay, and now we're going to do the twisted citron and the mowed lawn for our leaves. And I just realized I made this look exactly like the petals, but that's okay. So if you do get a little bit of the crayon piece in there or on your picture, you're going to want to take it off as quickly as possible, because it'll start to kind of, as you push it around the page, it draws, which means it scratches up your painting, and then it's really hard to blend that out because it dries pretty quickly in that sense. Or it dries pretty quickly in that state, sorry. Okay, and now we're going to wait for that to dry. Once that's dried, we're going to come back, add some detail with our pen, and then we will cut it out and glue it all together, and you will see what that's going to look like. So right away though, before we go, this is drying and it kind of has a bit of a roughness to it, how it dried, so you can see how it blended and where the different colors mixed together. Now I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but I think that's actually super fun because it gives it more texture and more dimension. And same with how this is drying. A lot of the pigment is sitting down here, so we'll see what that looks like when it's completely dry. This leaf is starting to dry and you see that line drying there. I could probably add more water and buff that out if I wanted to, but I wanted texture on the leaf, so I'm going to leave that as is, and we're going to come back once this is dry. So these aren't quite dry yet, but I wanted to take a look and show you how it dries unevenly and almost crackled, especially that one. And it's just such a fun textured effect for watercolor paint that you don't always get. So last time I used my Paper Mate Flare. I want to use something a little bit thinner. I'm going to use my Tombow monoline drawing pens in size 8. Normally I would use my Pigeon Letters monoline, but I have a feeling the paint's going to scratch off and affect how well the pen works, so I don't want to do that to my monolines, my Pigeon Letters. So what I'm doing, I'm just gently putting the pen on the paper and then lifting it up so that it has a rough look to it. You don't have to do it this way, you can draw solid lines, but I thought it would be fun to just play into the texture of the paint. And I'm just going over top of it to roughen it up a little bit more. I find that when watercolor paint dries, some leave this waxy film, and that gets easily picked up by the tip of the drawing pen that you're using. I have destroyed many pens this way, which is why I know. And then just for even more kicks, I'm going to grab a white jelly roll. Just realized we didn't draw a stamen middle part of the flower. I'm just going to use mustard seed. Okay, so we're gonna start just cutting this out. So I'm not cutting directly next to the line. I'm leaving a little bit of a border just to add to the roughness of it. And the paint definitely dries more textured based on the paper. So for example, on the smoother 160 GSM paper, you had less texture than you do on the watercolor, which is really interesting as well. So depending on what you're going for your layout or your design, you can use whichever paper you want directly into your journal, or you can use this method where you paint on watercolor paper and cut and glue into your notebook. Okay, so gonna grab our leaves, our petals and our leaves. What I like about this method too is that you're gonna give your work some dimension. Now, if you're using a thinner page than 160 GSM, you're maybe not going to want to do this method because it's going to create bumps in your page and you won't be able to write on it, which is going to be frustrating. Or you can use a thinner paper as well. Oh, I should have. And there we have a second way to use the distress crayons for a watercolor effect. Just stick that more in the center. And there you go. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know down below. If you didn't enjoy this video, please let me know down below. I would love to hear what you have to say. If this is going to make you use your distress crayons in your journal, let me know too. I love helping people use their stuff. Like I said, I've had these in my collection for about a year to 2 years, some 3 years, and honestly, putting this video together was the first time I've used it. So let me know if this has changed your mind on distress crayons, and let me know how you plan on using them. Thank you so much for your time today, and I will see you in the next one.